Started. Okay, there we go. I want to also introduce a couple of folks here. First joining us from First Parish Belmont is Downing Kless. Thank you, Downing, for joining us. He'll talk a little bit about a building envelope assessment that they did. Also, Sophia Goslin-Smosky. She is an intern working with Mass IPL this summer that we got to us through the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center, and the Clean Energy Center is supporting us in having her do a bunch of different projects. So that'll be good for her to hear what's going on here with the Zero Carbon Group, and go from there. All right, shall we dive in? I think, let's see. Well, we were starting to talk about First Parish Milton, but Bob, did you, Bob Williamson, did you say you had to leave a little early?
No.
No, okay, all right. Well, let's keep going on First Parish Milton. So that was the report that we shared, and sorry, I'm still learning sort of the Google share thing. I hope when you all asked for sharing and I did share it with you, you did get a chance to take a look at it. And so I guess, Richard, back to you on how did you find the folks at Deep Group? And we started to talk about what they did, but give us a little more of that background.
I'm sorry, you said Deep Group?
Yeah, DEAP.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
It was about 12 years ago, and they came in. They used an infrared gun, a thermographic imaging device, and used a blower door test equipment. From that, we got images of where our walls and ceilings were lacking insulation, and it also told us where we were getting large leaks of air into our buildings. We subsequently had some repairs done, had some insulation added, and sealed up some of those gaps.
Great. So that was, yeah, I imagine before that study, you didn't really know specifically where those things were. So
Right.
Well, that was helpful in sort of pinpointing some of that.
Right.
And I actually have that report open here. So I'm going to share that screen so here's, the photo of the room, just a normal photograph. And then here's where the infrared shows those dark areas are where the leaks are and things like that.
So those show where there's the cold areas. The dark is cold areas. Right. The lighter areas are supposedly insulated. Mm-hmm. So you can tell that there's some dark areas that shows that the insulation is kind of thin or missing.
Mm-hmm. And so when you were having the work done, did you share this report with those contractors, and did that then help them kind of direct where they were going to do the work? Okay.
Yeah.
So that's pretty helpful.
And Jim, if I may interject, this study, which was done, I guess in 2010, was as a result of an energy audit to identify potential savings. So the focus was more on reducing costs
Sure.
of heating than achieving any goals related to carbon reduction.
Yeah.
And that's going back 10 years. Energy cost was a big concern in doing assessments of a building's energy efficiency. Was a common goal for I think many parishes and homeowners. That's quite a different goal than creating a net zero building or facility. So that's these tests are still used for new construction to identify whether the building is as tight as it's been designed.
Right.
But they really a starting point rather than a finishing point.
Yeah. And that's a good point. So sort of where, does this have a place in the path to net zero, and where is, a good place to consider doing something like this?
Yeah, it will tell you where you can, where your current weaknesses are in your building, and help you eliminate them so as to reduce the cost of heating and cooling. But they only take you so far.
Right. Exactly. Well, and that's, one of the things that I think is useful about this is we have these really big and complicated buildings. And so being able to sort of pinpoint certain areas, like here that, appears there may be no insulation in the wall, allows you to really, get some focus behind this step, which always energy use reduction is an important thing to do as you, try to get, to net zero. And, other than that, it's, it can be challenging to sort of figure out what do we do first. But if you have some of these areas pinpointed, it seems that's a good, good place to start. And again, particularly, if it is helpful for the contractors to see things like this, so that they can, again, know what the scope of work is going to be. It seems to me that's a pretty useful component of the project as well.
Yeah, I would say it identifies the low-lying fruits.
Yeah.
Right.
The other piece of it, I think, that we have discussed in our recent conversations has to do with the less technical side of the equation, and that is we're the ones who know how different spaces are used. So spaces that get very little use or only once a week use or those kinds of things have a different kind of need than spaces that are used every day. I mean, that's just kind of stating the obvious, but you have to kind of blend these things together to help you figure out the priorities of what to fix first.
Yeah, that's a good point. Definitely a good point. So on the other piece of this with the blower door test, okay, you found out that the buildings are leaky, and then the infrared here pinpoints, some of those leaks. How else have you used any of those findings, or what are your thoughts going forward on whether you will repeat this kind of process, and if so, having done it once, are there things you might do a little differently to get more value and more results out of it?
Well, Richard, I don't know, do you want, certainly it probably makes sense to repeat these exercises now that 12 years has passed. But it's, again, it's one of several tools available to the parish to use to help move us forward in our mission, which is to reach net zero by 2035.
Mhm. I would agree with that.
Great.
Yes, it's going to depend on what the committee or the powers that be determine whether we want to pay for another blower door test, thermographic analysis.
Do you remember the cost of those tests, Richard, in rough terms,
I-
right?
No,
all?
no.
I mean, I don't think they're that expensive, to be honest with you.
I'll jump in because we just had one done and it's not, and I'll be talking about it in a few minutes. And it was $2,400.
Okay.
Yeah, Downey, I was actually going to say, since you did a similar test with a different company, would definitely love to bring you in and hear what your experience has been.
Well, this is a good time. I mean,
Yeah, jump in.
I was going to actually ask a question.
Okay,
with
no,
Milton,
go ahead. And then I see Ann
because
has a question
because
as well.
now I've revealed we just have done this. We consider it yes, low hanging fruit. That is the kind of the just startup of a bigger campaign toward carbon neutrality, which would mean basically electrification of the building. But that's of course an enormous expense. This is a lower level expense, even for the work that gets done. So I was going to ask Milton, how much did you pay for the work that got done in insulation and weatherization? And secondly, what kind of yield have you gotten now that it's 12 years? What kind of yield have you gotten from utilities bills? Because at least it's our sense from the reports we've gotten that there'd be immediate yield. And that has been very convincing to our parish board that this is a no-brainer to go ahead with this.
I think it's fair to say that we have not done that analysis. That we have done more analysis recently on our solar panels and and I don't have the numbers or anything, but I know that we have great savings from the electrification that we have done. So but that doesn't cover any of our heat sources because we're still using gas and oil. But our electric bills are essentially gone. And we're supplementing another agency as well with reduced costs. So that piece, I think that at least in the time that I've been in leadership in the church, I'm not aware that we did any deep analysis of how much did the test cost, how much over 4 or 5 years did we invest in replacing doors and running insulation. I'm sure we have the data that we could track down to do that. Or pretty sure that we do, but as far as I know, we have not done that analysis. And Richard and Hale can chime in if I'm lying. I guess not.
Yeah. Well, Richard, you've looked at our utility usage for extended periods. Does it cover that 12 years or not?
You're still muted, Richard.
We've looked at several years, but not in the years immediately after the work was done. So we'd have to look up the data and plug the numbers in and see how those compare. So that would be worthwhile doing.
Maybe.
Anecdotally, in those rooms that in the before showed a lot of, cold air and things. Anecdotally, have you had any sense from people that they feel more comfortable, that they feel warmer in those rooms?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. Anne, you've been very patient, had your hand up for a while.
I had a question. The photo we were looking at that had the dark space sort of halfway up to the top and that's showing us that like it's half insulated, sort of some insulation was done and then it stopped, or maybe there's a half timber in there. And I wonder how common that kind of discovery is. And also separately, not just about the half insulation, but what are the difficulties and obstacles in actually insulating a sanctuary wall? What kind of can it be done? How do you get access? How do you not ruin the interior? You know, what are some of the pitfalls, I guess?
Great question.
I can jump in from our report and say that there are limits, and that were pointed out by the report. The exterior walls really cannot be insulated because of possible condensation that they get from water, and so the insulation actually, from what I could tell from the report, actually would increase the chance of freezing water behind the walls, which would in fact damage the walls.
You've got stone. You've got stone.
Yes,
walls.
exactly. We have stone. Yeah.
And so I guess it's different for every church based on the materials and you know, and even each room or corner.
Exactly. That would be different for.
Well, there's one fundamental difference, and that's between stone and wood. The examples we've seen with the thermal imaging have been wood, and with conventional insulation, a lot of us are familiar with that from residential work. Right. Jim, it would be great to know on this call how many folks are worshiping in stone churches and how many in wooden, because like Downing said, a stone church insulation is risky, if not impossible, without completely removing the interior finishes and constructing a new wall inside. So how many people here have stone churches? And I don't have a full screen, so I don't know how many of us that means, how many churches are represented.
So I don't know the answer to our church. Someone else, Ed is on our call, but I think we were once wooden and then it got stucco stone veneer on the outside.
You've got a little of both.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So we're a hybrid.
Yeah. You know, in this case where you've got, you know, this kind of void, and this is, I think, if I'm right, Hale or Richard, you can tell me, I think this was in your sanctuary space, or was this in the meeting?
Can you scroll down a little so we can see the picture with, that's not the infrared picture?
Oh, sure.
There it is.
Yeah.
Oh, good question.
I think that actually, I think that's
that's the parish hall.
The parish hall space.
Yeah, the social hour space. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, what's typically done, and that is a wood clapboard building. And what's typically done, you know, in a case like this is you drill holes in the wall. You can either do it from the exterior or the interior. And then you stick a hose in and blow in cellulose insulation and pack it up. You know, if there is insulation, if there was insulation put in there originally and that building is of a vintage that there probably wasn't much, but often it will, you know, sag and over time just create gaps and things in the space like that you can then go in and fill up. But then of course you've got to patch that and then repaint. So it, you know, it involves more expense than simply the, you know, introduction of the insulation. And what we did run into at Winchester, Unitarian Church Winchester, I know we've got a couple of folks there. They had a ceiling that, you know, we had hoped to blow insulation in, and the contractor said they, you know, were unwilling to do it because it was a metal lath and plaster I think the building dated from about the 1950s. And that, cut hole in the wall technique, easy, pretty straightforward for typical drywall, gypsum board kind of construction materials. If you get into older plaster kinds of construction techniques, it's a little trickier, probably a little more time consuming, therefore a little more expensive. And again, particularly the mass save contractors, given I think the structure of the mass save program, I believe their compensation is fairly strictly defined. And so if you get into a condition that's a little out of normal, then, it's less profitable for them, and, there introduces, other issues there. Josh, I see you've got a hand up. Was that just to say you had a stone church, or did you have a question?
Nope, just to say I was a stone church.
Okay.
Good conversation so far.
Yeah.
Here, I'll
Yeah.
lower my hand. Yeah.
Okay, no worries. Downing, why don't you come back and tell us a bit more about, your study and, the firm that you've worked with.
The firm was BVH. I think it's called BVH Contracting. I don't have the report right up in front of me, unfortunately. But as I told you, it was $2,400. We did it back in January, and they came in with the thermal technique that's been mentioned, though I guess in the new up-to-date version, it's yellow where it's warm and red where it's hot. So it was even easier to see on what they gave us. And they came up with a series of recommendations. I mentioned to you the one that they could not recommend was any work related to the exterior walls. But our sanctuary actually happens to have the main length of the walls is actually in interior walls. So that actually helps us with our sanctuary. We have a buffer basically between the sanctuary and the exterior walls on the two long sides of the sanctuary. This is our report.
Yeah.
Yay.
Okay, I found you had sent it to me, so I
yeah, very good, very good, Jim.
Yeah.
So that really helps. So basically, what they did find is, that the wall studs are obviously warmer than the cavity, that is something that they said basically that we could add more wall. I mean, basically that's what's been mentioned is you can essentially add a wall inside of your wall. And provide insulation behind that wall, and that helps, but that would be an enormous, that would be a big expense. And in the case of the sanctuary, the other thing though that they found a lot of is moving on to the attic and the ceiling. They found that there was a lot of heat loss through the attic, obviously, because heat rises, and that, there wasn't, again, short of redoing our entire attic, we couldn't solve the problem completely, but they did propose that for about $6,000, something like that, or not a huge amount, we could get a layer of insulation at the bottom between the ceiling and the attic, and that they did recommend that. And so that we're looking at. Then they dealt with windows, and of course with stained glass, we have some very old windows. We had some plastic put on that was through the windows. Here we're still on the attic, actually. Okay. One of the things that made it difficult to think of insulating the attic completely is things like plumbing and recessed lighting that, you know, that were part of the attic. And then if you move on down, I think you'll find the section. Yes, here we are. The
Here's the
leakage through windows. You can see here's a stained glass window at the back of our sanctuary, and you were getting a lot of leakage around it. They recommended replacing the plastic basically, and with a, there can be a clear plastic insert. And presumably this would be the case with our big stained glass window at the opposite end of our sanctuary, that we could do something similar. That might have been done recently. We had that whole window redone. It took a full year. We were without the window for a full year, or maybe even a year and a half. And hopefully that did happen at that point. Because that would be the more complicated one to get to. It's enormous, and compared with these that are much smaller. But these are they do face the exterior walls directly. Okay, on either end of the shorter ends of the sanctuary, and so doing that work would be important. Then the next thing they found was door leakages are, easy to fix. We just hadn't paid enough attention to, you can see this big gap. This is our main door that people come in through, and there's an enormous open air leak there that just can easily be sealed. I mean, that's a no-brainer, and nobody's paid attention to it over the years, our building committee or anybody else. It did have they did have one piece of weather stripping that essentially needed to be replaced, but they recommend a stronger seal, in other words, weather stripping that's really going to, seal that gap. Then we were getting it through a back door too, that goes down into a stairwell. So here, as I mentioned, the yellow is warm, the purple or pink is or reddish, even worse, gets lots of leakage. Then the last thing they found in our new part of our building is that baseboards were not properly insulated, and that our new part of our building only goes back to around 2005, and so simply there was insufficient insulation put in, or no insulation, it looks like, maybe put in behind the baseboard. And that's again an easy thing to fix. So those were the things they recommended. And if you go down, I think, to the next, maybe go down a little further. The other big point is the connecting point between the two buildings, the new building and the old building, and that needs some work also because of air leakage. And then they came up with their recommendations, and here they are. And so insulate the sanctuary ceiling border, with wool bats. That's what I forgot. Medium density mineral wool bats, and air seal the attic floor. And it's 5,000. I think I'd said 6 originally. So 5,000 with a pretty immediate annual savings and a fairly substantial one. And then install the window inserts over the pane windows, and install new weather stripping on the doors, and then the baseboard and the addition connecting points, and the whole thing totals $16,600. So when we mentioned all this to our parish board, they went, wait a minute, that's a no-brainer. I mean, that's something we can even add to a budget for next year. That's not like something we have to do an extra campaign to raise money for. Or we can do it over a couple or 3 years if we want to be more frugal. And so I believe that work is going to go ahead as soon as possible. The problem I should mention to you is I'm not. I should have mentioned to begin with that I'm the chair of our Green Committee. We call it the FCB Green Committee, and we go back about 6 or 7 years. We started by getting our church to divest from fossil fuels. We then put solar panels up, and by the way, that did yield in the first year a 14% reduction in our utility bill. And now it's a little harder. It's been much harder to track during the pandemic for obvious reasons. And each member of our committee tends to have expertise in one area or another. There's one guy has been our big solar guy, for instance. But now the weatherization guy I'm reporting on his behalf because he's A, on vacation, but B, really wants me to be the representative to this learning group. And I'm happy to do that if I'm got the information from him. He arranged for the report from BVH, as I said, back in January. Then went to the parish board, and they said, go forth and get exact proposals from an engineering company to do the work. And so he found Rise Engineering is who he's been working with. Well, there was one company that he started with, and they simply, I can't even remember the name of the company, but they basically kept not responding. Okay, so he turned to Rise Engineering. Rise Engineering wanted to do their own walkthroughs. He had done one walkthrough with this previous company, and then they kind of dropped the ball. Then Rise has done 2 walkthroughs, and they mentioned, for some reason, not finding the BVH report especially useful. And I don't know why. It seems pretty accurate to me as reading it. It seems to be pretty clear, and that they seem to do a pretty good job. So I don't know why, and they didn't tell him why. And he hasn't gotten back to ask, and they haven't gotten back to him now. He's asking them for a proposal, and it's been about a month or 6 weeks, and they have not come forward with a proposal. So to be continued on that, but we hope to get a proposal. He keeps nudging them and is going to continue to nudge them, because we'd like to get the work done even this summer, if possible, before we're pretty much hoping, as everybody is, in the fall, to reopen fully and have all of our programs and services back at full tilt. And so it's, of course, much harder to get work like this done anytime other than the summer. And I guess that I can field any questions at this point.
Because, of course, Belmont is a municipal electric community. Because what I'm going to go back here to some of the attic stuff.
Right. I'm glad you mentioned that we do not get any incentives here. Yeah. There are incentives for this kind of work for weatherization, from potentially from either your electric company or your gas company. And we have a gas furnace, by the way. And but we do have the solar panels. But municipal light, there's no possibility of incentives from any municipal light company. Not just Belmont, but I guess any of them. And then for some reason we could, we also are not, subject to any incentives from National Grid, which is our gas provider. And then I think Mass Save doesn't. Is it true that some things you can get for churches and other things you can't, or what? What's the story on Mass Save? I've forgotten. What that is.
Yeah. Well, that gets complicated, but
Yeah.
actually, I'm going to check, because if you have National Grid for gas, I would love to actually see one of your bills, because I assume that there is a charge for the Mass Save program on your gas bill, in which case, these kinds of things that are very much about heating, like, I would think you could get some incentives for that, and I can chase down some of my
Well,
contacts.
that would be
at
good,
Mass
because
Save.
at least John Colderman, who's our weatherization guy, reported to me that we were not able to get anything from Mass Save.
Yeah.
I mean, from National Grid, and
From
I
National
guess
Grid.
that would include or
Right.
be Mass Save in that
Right.
that instance.
Yeah. Because anyway, in the Mass Save program, these kinds of things with the the recessed lighting and these plumbing penetrations, this is like standard air sealing kind of service that the Mass Save program does, and typically pays 100% of the cost for.
Wow. Okay.
So certainly for the rest of you, I think everyone else is in either an Eversource or National Grid service territory. If you see these kinds of conditions in your attic, can definitely do that. And in terms of that question about, do churches get the same things as houses? They should, but there is a lot of confusion among the contractors and even in the program itself, whether you're in the small commercial, building class, or in the residential building class. And each of those classes have slightly different, measures that the program supports. But, these, things like this are just such basic air sealing things.
Right. And in fact, this report points out that we got 6 inches of insulation blown in at some point without the air sealing, and it basically is doing no good.
Yeah, doesn't really help you. Exactly. Exactly. One of the other things, particularly with these recessed lights these days, now that LEDs have taken over, yes, you can stick an LED bulb, screw an LED bulb into these cans, but the other thing, which probably would be more effective, would be to replace the cans with LED lights that are like, they're like a very thin disc. So you can pretty much, take that can out, seal up the hole, attach one of these LED discs, and you get a very, very tight kind of thing. Obviously, more cost than the other way, but it's a different option there. Any other questions for Downing? That was really great, Downing. Really appreciate that.
Yeah, one thing I would say, maybe what Rise was saying was they do that on their own walkthrough, and that then we were maybe, it was unnecessary to have this $2,400 extra expense. That may be what you all would want to look at is, do you want to just go straight to the contractor and have the contractor do this kind of walkthrough? Though the question is, would they have the thermostatic equipment that BVH has. I mean, you know, that's powerful evidence that they might not find. The baseboard thing, for instance, they might not have found that if they did not have the thermostatic thing. They would have found the attic stuff. That was pretty self-evident.
Exactly. Yeah, well, that's I'll just tell a funny story, because when after I did the ESA at in Winchester, and we had Rise Engineering come out as the mass save contractor for Winchester, came out and walk around, and we were in that 1950s religious education building looking at that. And I have a small infrared attachment that attaches to my iPad. And so I'm showing the guys from Rise, you know, some things, you know, on that. And they're like, wow, you have better equipment than we do.
Oh, okay. So then
that's, and I think the difference, you know, what I'm beginning to appreciate is the difference is, you know, if you have a contractor coming out, you know, they're really looking at, you know, what jobs they can sell and get signed on the dotted line and get done quickly, versus if you're paying for, you know, a study like this, you know, they're going to tell you, I think, you know, they're going to focus on some of these other aspects, you know, of the building, and try to do it's really a more thorough, I think, analysis, which, again, they found some things and recommended against doing them, like that insulation against the stucco and the stone. But, you know, again, they find things like that baseboard air sealing, pretty expensive, has a longer payback, but, you know, otherwise you just wouldn't know that was even an option.
Correct.
So.
And they might try to Rise, if you just went without a report like this, Rise might try to sell you on doing something with the exterior wall that you would not want to do, I guess. Yeah.
Do you know how you guys found BVH?
I don't. I can ask John.
Yeah.
Because I know.
I wasn't aware of them before I saw this report.
Okay. And I think he found, I think he found Rise maybe through your list, right?
Could be, yeah. Great. Any other questions or thoughts on this kind of report?
Is this one that you're willing to share with this group, or have you already? I missed that. I saw the other report, but is this one, is your church willing to share it with this group?
Let me check back with John on that, and then probably so, but let me just double check that with our point person.
Great.
Thank you.
Great. Okay. Josh, let me bring you in here. We'll switch gears a little bit. A different kind of study at Parish of the Epiphany, focusing on their heating equipment. So they engaged a mechanical engineering firm called Norian Ciani Engineering that Mass IPL has worked with a lot for a long time, and they've done a lot in churches. And you know, they've got a very, very specific and very narrow focus on, you know, the heating and ventilation equipment, so they don't get into a lot of these other aspects of the walls and the insulation. But Josh, why don't you give us, you know, a rundown of what you did with Sergio Ciani and how that has, you know, then fed into some of the things that you guys are thinking about.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. That had happened before I was involved. So I got some hearsay in terms of what had happened and how it went. I'll also say that let me give a little bit of a different context. We're actually in the process of contracting with a architectural consulting firm to do an overall assessment of the building potential enhancements to the building across the board, for the next 10 or 12 years. So the environmental assessment that we did with you is kind of meant to be a feed into that.
Yep.
And the overall building assessment that we're doing is not it's not focused on emissions per se or climate per se. It's really kind of just focused on structural changes. But we wanted to make sure that we looked at first of all, that we looked at a roadmap to zero carbon before we got into the overall larger picture in terms of what changes we might make to the building overall. So that's a little bit in process. I will have to apologize. I just had knee surgery, so I've taken about a 3-week hiatus in terms of working through some of this stuff. So it'll start to pick up again in the summer in terms of working with the property committee and that plan. So that's the conversation there. But as far as Noriana Sierra, we had gotten a proposal. The timing of it unfortunately happened right before COVID. And so there was a fairly substantial proposal that they had put together, which we haven't really acted on. We kind of transitioned a lot of our expenses towards hybrid worship, AV, et cetera, and so that's ended up where we've ended up spending our funds, but primarily the proposal was focused on our parish hall, and I think we share with a lot of folks on this call an old building on a number of different fronts. Our actual sanctuary is brick and stone. It has a steam heat system circa 1910. Upgraded many times over the years, but it still is fundamentally a steam heat system, with the massive radiators that you would have expected from something at the turn of the 20th century. We have our parish hall was built in the 1950s, and so it's a little bit more modern, but still have got a good deal of work. And the area that we were looking at for the HVAC proposal we're talking about here was to replace the original HVAC system that was installed in the parish hall in 1955. So the most likely, so the original proposal was to replace replace a ventilator in that system, and first and foremost to update the zones and the thermostats so that we could have much better control over heating systems and reliability. That was the first level of change that we had looked to make. The second level of change that was certainly considered would have been to implement heat pump across the board, and we will do that in some way, although it may be done in different stages. We have a couple of different sections of the building. There's a very large gathering hall, the parish hall, which supports about 300 to 400 people. But they're also, and that's used fairly infrequently. That's probably used twice a week at the most on the average. But we do have a set of offices which are in that same part of the building, which are used 6 days a week, 9 to 5. And so the most likely scenario that we'll end up doing would be to go to upgrading those rooms and those areas with heat pumps, as kind of an initial first phase. So I'll leave it at that. There's a lot more involved in that HVAC master plan, but since it wasn't implemented, it ends up being a story for a different time.
Yeah. Yeah. And since it was 2016, that was a little bit before heat pumps became, as much of the focus as they are now. And I would say even back then, for spaces like yours, they were maybe not, the technology wasn't quite ready. So I imagine if you had a study like this updated today, it would be different. Though again, we're all wrestling with those big sanctuary spaces and whether heat pumps, are the right, technology for them or not.
Right. And one other thing that I will add is that, I mean, there are a lot of, I guess I would call somewhat unexpected findings. And so when you did our environmental stewardship assessment, one of the opportunities that we really hadn't considered that much was simply to better insulate the roof of that 1950s parish hall, because relatively speaking, it would be a fairly straightforward project to do that insulation. It could be insulated from the interior, and it's a flat surface roof, or very large, but fairly straightforward flat surface roof. So there's a number of elements that are a little bit less costly and extensive than we're having our entire HVAC system. And so our thoughts are very much to phase that out or phase it in so that there will be a series of different phases. We will have to replace the HVAC system in the parish hall at some point. I mean, it's at the point of breaking down, right. Sometimes.
And it's one of these classic sort of, when that building was added, it was like grafted on to your existing heating system. So the steam comes over there. And if I remember right, there's like a heat exchanger or something, which then, turns into a forced air system for the thing. So like, so you've got, the boiler room is over here, and the piping kind of has to go up here, over here, down here before it gets to the hall. So there's a lot of inherent inefficiency in something like that.
It's amazing when you think of it, of how inefficient those designs were.
Yeah. Sue, you're on mute. Did I see your hand up?
Any consideration of solar?
There is actually. We had an assessment of solar about 6 or 7 years ago. There were a few reasons why it didn't work. One, we have a slate roof. Two, the orientation of the roof was not ideal. One of the findings of the ESA that we just had was in that parish hall, where the orientation is better. There actually would be an opportunity for storage, which we kind of hadn't. We had kind of looked at storage for the entire church grounds. But primarily with a focus on the sanctuary. And in retrospect, there may be a good opportunity for solar, a solar array that would be on that newer part of newer class 1950s newer. Right. Also there's less concern around architectural integrity for that building than there is for the original parish hall, which is what's the word? An architectural heritage site.
And I wonder if there's a way to, if you did put solar on that building, would there be a way to transfer some of that energy to the other building?
Could be, although might be looking at, but it is, it is a single zone that is, steam powered. I'm not sure. We could look at it, I guess, but I'm not sure how that would be done, because it's more likely that we're going to have to at some point down the line do an all-out replacement of the circa 1910 steam system.
Yeah, like I think, in most of the conversations I've had with most of you, the general approach really is to try to take those places like the offices, Josh, you were talking about,
Right.
that are most used, and try to get those off the fossil fuel systems. That's relatively easy. That 1950s parish hall, that's relatively easy, and it becomes then sort of isolated from the steam system, and then you work backward to the steam system. But Sue, I think you were also asking about if they put solar panels on there, could that electricity be, sent to other parts of the building? Absolutely. That would be something the installer would have to look at, the wiring and getting it from the panels to the proper, electrical panel in other parts of the building. I know there's several electrical panels in the building.
So
So
I was, yep,
Yeah.
totally correct. I was focusing more on the heating aspect of it, from an electrical aspect of it. Yes, certainly.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'd be able to do that.
Yeah,
Would
that
definitely-
works that way with us. The solar panels are on the new part of the building in the parish hall, but it's electricity for the whole building.
Mhm,
Yeah.
yep.
Cool.
Sorry, are those two buildings in your church connected, or is it just a breezeway between the two?
They are connected. There's a series of side buildings that were built between 1920 and 1940, then provide the connecting, and the offices that I referred to are kind of in that connecting building area.
Okay.
Yeah.
A question.
Yeah.
How much does it cost to replace, say, an entire HVAC system? I know you were saying eventually, Josh, that you're going to have to replace it.
I have to go back and look at the
Well, yeah. Let me
in
pull
front
up.
of you there. I'll let Jim pull that up.
I can pull it up because it's especially the
Sophia, that's like the biggest question this whole
Yeah, of
group
course.
has about, oh my God, what are we looking at here?
Absolutely.
exactly.
Absolutely.
Jim, in the executive summary, there was a quote of between $600,000 and $700,000,
Yeah.
and that was 2016 prices.
Yeah, I think that's correct. Where did that go now?
Yeah, I can jump in and say we did that 2 years ago at about that price, and had to have a special fundraiser to accommodate it.
We're anticipating that this project becomes a capital campaign project, without a doubt.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And
Yeah, and that's the other complication, which again a lot of you face, is you've got a steam system, and no one is installing steam systems anymore. So you're going to, again, that 2016 report was then go to basically a baseboard hot water system. So not only is there the equipment, now there's all the piping, and you have to run new piping and new radiators, which is obviously a big piece of that cost as well. And that's one of the advantages, where heat pumps come in, because it is easier to run the line sets for the in-space type of equipment, whatever type of equipment it is, than it is to do all that hydronic piping and stuff like that. So it's a little bit easier to do. Sorry, Sophia, go.
so I can't remember if it was already said, but how often usually do you have to replace, say, an HVAC system?
I'll jump in and say we were given about a 17-year lifespan. And so, and I know that because we're looking at our carbon neutrality campaign here as being something heading toward 2035, where we would replace both the HVAC system and the furnace. Furnace got replaced about 4 years ago. And that would be the point we would try to go for full electrification. So it gives us this 15-year, or well, now really a 13-year span to do a capital campaign and also within the church budget to set aside a certain amount every year. So some would come from set asides, and some would come from a full, capital campaign because we're, and so that we'd be ready to make that expense. The furnace, I should mention, was replaced on set asides. The parish board had actually done a good job. The previous time the furnace had been replaced, they started to add a $10,000 a year set aside in the budget. So when the time came, they pretty much had enough money.
That's right. Great. Yeah, and that's, there's different components of the heating system. So whether it's furnaces and boilers, well, particularly furnaces do typically last about 15 to 20 years. Boilers can go 25 to 30 years. An air conditioning compressor or a heat pump are again about 15 years. And then so that's the actual what's called generation, because you're generating heat in those things. Whereas like the piping, for a steam system, that lifetime is like 75 to 100 years. So, in Epiphany's case, if that was installed in 1910 or so, it's 110 years old and it's just kind of due.
Yeah, Jim, we're spending, last year we spent over $10,000 just replacing failed steam distribution piping, steam and condensate pipe.
Right. It just gets to
and
that.
We do that regularly. We spend $5,000 a year on that.
Yeah. Great. I'm going to give a shout out to Ken Pruitt, who's been listening here. He's kind of among us. He's a little more on the professional side than the rest of us knowledgeable amateurs. And I don't know, Ken, have you done these kinds of studies on buildings in Winchester or Arlington prior? And what are your thoughts on how these kinds of studies can inform this net zero path we're all thinking about?
Well, you're very kind in that introduction, Jim. I think actually the cumulative knowledge of everyone on this call exceeds my own when it comes to these types of studies. Most of the studies that I've done have been for, almost all of them have been for municipal buildings. And they've really been the kind of study when you have a contractor who wants to come in and do a specific project, whether it be insulating, air sealing, putting in a condensing boiler, along those lines. So this kind of basic study where you don't have a project in mind and you look at everything from scratch seems incredibly valuable. And it's the kind of thing that I wish Mass Save were more into funding. The kind of high level ASHRAE study, all the building systems, the envelope, it can be incredibly valuable. And, generally you have to pay for that type of thing yourself, which I think is a barrier. And as a result, I haven't done too many of them because there have always been so many individual pieces of low-hanging fruit to pick for specific projects that I've just done those, series of projects. There are always sort of an endless number of those when you have a portfolio of municipal buildings.
Yeah.
But I highly recommend doing the kind of full-scale, envelope and systems study that we've been talking about today. It's an exciting conversation.
Yeah. And I'm on my town energy committee, and Ken, we're a little bit behind where you are, and I'm just trying to get our town officials to put together sort of a schedule of when they can anticipate, the systems to be at the end of their useful life. And we're a fairly small town. I think there's only 13 or 14 municipal buildings, but they've got one emergency in the middle school right now where they just got to replace something this summer. And so I'm trying to get them to, let's look at all those 13 buildings. Let's look at each of the systems, figure out when they were installed, plot out when they might need to be replacing them. Let's get a capital plan in place to do that. And Bob, I think as you were talking about, if it's, 5, 10, 15 years in the future, now you can start planning and putting some money aside so that when that time comes, it's not, again, not an emergency. It's not a, oh my God, how are we going to get this done? It's like, okay, we knew this was coming. We've got, much of, if not all the money set aside. Great. No big deal. Let's just, plow through it here. But I also wanted to pick up on, Ken, what you were saying about these studies. And I've been talking with Hale and the folks at First Parish Milton about an idea and, trying to pull this together where I have come across a energy consultant. He's based actually up in New Hampshire, who is knowledgeable in the world of energy modeling. And we're trying to find the right kind of software program. There are several software programs out there that allow you to create a computer mathematical representation of a building and its energy consumption. And when you do it, you input, again, is it stone or wood? How many windows? How big are the windows? You put in all these kind of characteristics that are going to affect the energy consumption. And then once you do that, the model allows you to play these what if games of, well, what if we replace single pane windows with double or even triple pane? Or we think the insulation in the walls is about an R13. What if we could bring that up to R20? Or let's say it's an R13 wall and we put another, R5 of exterior insulation and wrap the whole building in that. And it outputs then, first of all, what are the energy and carbon savings? But some of the programs using, some kind of industry rule of thumb kind of cost data can actually provide, at least a ballpark estimate to get you started. It gives you that, is this going to be, a few $1,000s, or is this going to be several $100,000 kind of number, so that is this even within the realm of possibility? So we're still trying to work through finding the right software program that is affordable and is going to be easy enough to work with and collaborate on. But I think that would provide us a tool to do these these kinds of studies, and again give you some of that kind of input into thinking where is kind of the highest yield to put time, effort, and money into. Is that something, is that something that people find interesting? Because I'm pressing ahead with it, and if there's enough interest, I will definitely press harder on it.
I'd like to note that I find it intriguing, Jim. I'm curious in terms of what kind of criteria are you looking at? I mean, in terms of applicability, and particularly since buildings do vary, and also who would be in a sense administering, in terms of gathering the data. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, this is where the idea is that this guy's name is Mike McQueenie of Energy Services, New Hampshire. And so, and this is what, we've started at First Parish Milton, where he came down with one of his colleagues. They, took pictures and made notes and started to understand what all was in the building, so that when, we pick one of these software programs, they would then build the model in the program. So they would input all that data about, the insulation in the windows and all that sort of thing. And then ideally at that stage, we'd like it to be our vision is that it would be a collaborative process. And one of the programs we're looking at is a web-based program that would allow us to share it and log on with you. But even at that point, with a little bit of training, someone potentially could go in there and say, great, let's look at, a window replacement project and click a few buttons here, and let's see what that would cost and what that would potentially yield for us. And just, for what we've found so far is these software programs cost between about $800 to $1,500 per building. And then Mike's time comes out to another like $3,000 to $3,500. So we're looking at a $4,000 to $500,000 or $4,000 to $5,000 project to build that model and then have it available. So just again, curious if that is something that seems doable, seems valuable to you all.
I'm curious, Jim, how would it be different from the interfaith power and light assessment? What data would it give you that your assessment wouldn't?
Yeah, it would. Yeah, I mean, it would really build on that because, our assessment talks about, here are some projects you could do. Here's where you could add some insulation. Here's where you could change some windows or, replace doors, things like that. And then this program would then say, great, let's do it in the model. Let's replace those windows. Let's replace those doors. And again, that program will spit out some of those ballpark cost numbers, and as well as spitting out, as we saw in the BVH report, kind of, here's what the savings, both energy and carbon savings, would be from that particular project. So really build on it and, start to put more specificity on, what the results, could be from taking those actions. Bob, it looks like your hand's up. Yeah. Hey, Bob.
Yeah, I'm intrigued, and now I'm thinking about how effective it would be. Our options are limited. Just thinking from the perspective of our stone church, every hall is built out of stone. Yeah. So we won't, and every ceiling is peaked right under the slate roofs. Yeah. So we have I am assuming at this point, it's my walking around assumption that we will not have the opportunity to insulate the first two most important pieces of the envelope to insulate. That is the ceilings and the walls. So what we have left are the windows, and many of them are stained glass or leaded. Well, actually, all of ours are leaded glass.
Right.
So our only option is to go from an R1 to an R2 with interior storms. So I'm, really questioning its effectiveness in terms of determining the use. But what I am interested in is how to predict what you would need to do, or whether it's even feasible to heat those spaces with those limits using heat pumps. Because we're all, when ours was built, they were shoveling coal until the cows came home, and didn't care. And now we care. So can we heat the space that they didn't care with the equipment that cares? And I don't know, that to me is the information that we want. So I'm not quite sure how we are, because we're going to be faced with making that assessment. Is it even possible? Right. So that's that's where I'm at in terms of assessment.
Yeah. And that's where, that's one of the things that a mechanical engineer can do. Mm-hmm. There is an industry protocol that is designed by, I believe it's the American Society. ASHRAE, right? So you're familiar with the
Yeah,
ASHRAE.
heat loss calc, sure.
Heat loss calcs, manual J heat loss calcs. So, that is a way of getting it. How many BTUs do we need to pump into this space? And then from there you can back into, okay, how much equipment do we need? How much that equipment cost? And is that even viable? But it's, that's the right kind of calculation, the right way to think about it, for sure. Anne.
I just say I am intrigued by that idea, and I think what would help if it can do this, but what would help us a lot is to sort of compartmentalize all the different components of our building complex. So we've got a 1853 main sanctuary. Yep. That's really old.
Yep.
Then we've got the newer 1927 parish hall, and then we've got a 1965 bunch of stuff. And to be able to model like which area to focus on. If we do this in the big Chidley Fellowship Hall, will this help us first? So the vastness of our complex is kind of what's, a barrier for us to like catalog it all and gather it up. So if this model could sort of start gathering up stuff for this section of the building and then model it for some other section of the building, and especially if we're going to need different solutions, like we've got 55 occupied rooms and 77 distinct rooms. But 3 of them are huge. So would the smaller rooms have the heat pumps and the big rooms have something else altogether? And if it can help us break the big problem down into smaller components, that would be really neat. And I'm like really happy to do all the data collection. If somebody tells me what I'm supposed to measure and go find it, I can do that piece of it, but I wouldn't know how to do any of the modeling.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, because I think, most of you have that same situation where there's various additions and things, added to the building over the years, and figuring out, where to start and what are the impacts in the different buildings with different construction materials at different, times in history is a very common problem. Yeah, Ken.
Yeah, you just touched on some of what I was thinking about, which is, the older a building and the larger a building, often the more complex it is. And so providing a software tool to, basically a lay person and having them enter data, they might not know which data to enter. There might not even be the right fields for a particular construction type. So I guess the main thing I would say is I would just beta test, see if you can find a couple of guinea pig parishes to, beta test it with you and see what works, what doesn't, and if they found it valuable, and that'll sort of tell you whether it's an effective tool, and then you also have sort of the proof and testimonial that it worked.
Yeah, well, that's the path that Hale and Richard and the folks at First Parish and I have been on for a month or so. We're hoping, Mike has worked a lot with a particular program called Ret Screen that he'd actually taught at a community college. And then we found out the software licensing model for an academic versus a commercial setting was very different, and so he was thinking from the academic standpoint, he'd be able to use this software. And then we find out, oh no, this is a different application. So they've got a whole different model and that's not going to work. So that's where we are kind of stuck in figuring out, how to find the right, it's like the software is almost the easier part than it is the sort of, commercial model with these firms of what's going to work for our budgets and our types of buildings.
We're a little more like an academy than we are like a business, though.
Yeah, right.
That might end up playing in our favor at some point, being a nonprofit.
Yeah, and I would just comment on that we are a nonprofit, and many service providers provide different pricing models for nonprofits versus commercial enterprises.
Unfortunately, I tried that one. I certainly tried that one on Ret Screen, and they were like, "No, we don't offer a nonprofit."
Yeah.
Well,
like,
you can try.
It's it's certainly worth pursuing, because I think a lot of, for example, Microsoft and Google, they all have
Yeah.
nonprofit models, which are much different than their commercial. So,
Right.
Jim, you mentioned that you found a program that was free. It was called eQuest,
Quest.
that is offered by a government agency.
Yep.
But the drawback you mentioned was that it does not provide cost data.
Yeah, I believe that's the case. I haven't delved into it in depth yet, but I think that's the case.
I'm just
And again,
wondering, is the cost data for the services provided to correct conditions?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
But wouldn't the program tell you how much energy you're losing for certain conditions,
Yes.
posed conditions? Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So it would give you that, here's how much energy would be saved by doing this project. And then you can calculate the savings in dollars and carbon from there. Which you may even in a lot of these programs, you can put in your cost for, kilowatts or therms of gas, and so it can do that calculation. And like this one program, Bill D, ties into a database that I believe comes from New York, the NYSERDA program, that again has these industry benchmarks of costs for insulation and window replacements and things like that. So it gives you that kind of package. So we're gonna keep working, Hale, with you on finding the pilot site and seeing if we can get one or more of these up and running, and maybe I'll circle back to you and Jessica, and we've talked a lot about what you guys are doing up there, and see if maybe you guys would be interested in being part of that too. So we're coming up on an hour and a half, and I don't want to, keep everybody all afternoon, though I find this stuff fascinating. My last question is, so should we meet over the summer? Should we take a little hiatus? Should our next meeting be Zoom, or should we meet at one of our churches and see in the person some of the conditions and things we've been talking about for the last couple of months here? Jessica.
Yeah, I would propose, and depends on everyone else's schedule, that we take a bit of a hiatus, but that we plan to meet in person in one of the churches, say like in the September timeframe. And of course, we still can be in contact during this time, but I'm just a little concerned. I know a lot of people will be traveling and the like. So that's one suggestion.
Phil, was that an applause, or was that okay? That's a thumbs up from Phil. Thinks that makes a lot of sense.
I think it seems like a good idea.
Okay.
I can't speak for Phil.
And would need to. I mean, thankfully there's a couple of other representatives from First Congregational Church here, but what are your thoughts about considering for us to be the host church for our first meeting?
I think
it would be great, but I'm not sure we're the best candidate. I don't know what all the issues are, but I don't see any reason why we wouldn't invite people to come see what we're up against.
Well, that might
got a lot to show
people to know that they're not alone.
Yeah, no, I think your site would be good, because there are a lot of different issues and different kinds of projects that I know you're thinking about, and I don't know where you are in that RFP that you were putting together for the building study and electrification study, and I don't know if maybe by fall you might have at least maybe some initial results from that to share as well. Ed, you've got your hand up there.
Yeah, I just want to say that we're kind of like Thomas's English muffins. We got a lot of nooks and crannies in that building.
I know there's something for everybody there, I'm sure.
There is, absolutely.
Okay. Well, thank you for that offer. Does that sound good to the group? We'll aim for September, maybe sort of later in September, let everybody get back, and all our churches will be getting back into the swing of things, and any kids or grandkids will be getting back into school. So maybe later in September, we'll aim to get together. Okay, great. And in the meantime, what I can do is follow up with a list of these companies that have done these studies and contact folks at these companies. And Downing, if you have the contact information at BVH, if you could send that to me, I can circulate that. And so then if anybody's interested in talking with those companies about potentially doing one of these studies for your buildings, you'll have the information.
Well, the contact info is right on the report, Jim. So,
okay.
So you've got that. But I'm going to check with John about being able to share the report with everybody. And then I'll let you know, and you can really share it because you've got the whole database.
Right. Okay. Super. All right. Any last thoughts? I really appreciate everybody sharing their stories. It's a really interesting session today.
Thanks, Jim.
It's great.
Thank you so much for letting me join.
Thanks for coming, Sophia.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks.
Have a good day, everybody.
Bye.
Jim, can I just do a quick check-in with you?
Yeah, sure.
I just wanted to, what are you thinking about in terms of, I mean, it would be great for us. I think it's an opportunity. I'd like to confer with the folks on my side to make sure that we have the Bruce Alexander and the Ann Haneke, and they have been fantastic with and we also want to be able to meet with you and Ken probably in the very near term.
Okay.
Because a lot of changes have been incorporated in a second version.
Oh, good.
RFP. So yeah, we are. We may feel like we're still dragging in the weeds, but we are making headway. So why don't if I may, I'll reach out to them and find a time frame, and then I could come back with a doodle poll. But on your end, what would be a favorable time in terms of meeting?
Let me pull up. Oh man, September is so far out in the future. It's
but it won't be.
Yeah, but time will fly. I'm thinking, again, sort of, okay, so Labor Day is the 5th.
Mm-hmm.
So again, for all of the church startup stuff and anybody who has kids or grandkids that they're getting back into school and stuff, maybe that, the week of the 18th.
Okay. All right.
Or maybe in like the 21st, 22nd, or that following week.
Okay, well, how about this? Why don't I'll just confer with the group, run by some of your dates, and then I'll bounce this back at you. I just want to make sure it works definitively on your end, and then we can set something up. And we promise we will have coffee and eats.
Oh, wonderful!
By ourselves, because it's a big campus.
Yeah.
And there's going to be a lot of good information exchange. So we're going to need to have plenty of be fortified for the event.
Yeah. And I can work with like you and Ed and folks, and because I think there are we might do as I'm thinking back on when I went through the building with Bruce and Ed, there are 3 or 4 spaces in particular that kind of stuck in my mind as things that are really emblematic of some of your challenges. So
are you talking about the big halls and so forth in terms of yes, we have those, and we also have a really inefficient zone system.
Right. Exactly.
So we have lots of good examples.
Yeah.
And of course, we can certainly give you a tour of the bowels of the church where all the everything else is.
Or the guts
Yeah,
of
the
everything
guts,
else.
yes.
Yeah. And I know Ed and Bruce were looking at some windows. I don't know if they've
They
made
were. It was a lot more expensive than they anticipated, and
yeah,
actually that
windows are
makes me
tough.
think we were going back and forth, and what we wanted to ask you about
Yeah.
was, since we're thinking about building, you're talking about
Mhm.
building envelope HVAC solar,
Yeah. Yeah.
about rather than thinking Windows having an assessment done,
Mhm.
such that that would be part of the building envelope analysis,
Mhm.
rather than just going ahead and doing it. What are your thoughts on that?
I think the question that you need to think about is, and I'm trying to remember the name of that one big hall.
You're talking about Chidley?
Chitley,
Yes.
but has that huge wall of glass.
Oh, yes.
And it's all single pane, of course.
Of course.
And yeah, and in the kitchen as well, it's pretty much all, it's counters, and then the counter to the ceiling is like all glass. Sort of one of the things for you to think about is, would you be okay with not replacing all of that glass, but building some wall as well? Like in Chidley, instead of those windows going all the way up to the ceiling, maybe they're only 8 or 10 feet, because I think it's like 12 or 15 foot.
Yes.
And if
Yes.
you then you built wall, and now you've got, R20 for that,
Yes.
space. And
Yes.
then, so you've got less window area. So that helps. And building a wall will probably be less expensive than window.
Yes. Yes.
And then you might be able to upgrade the windows, and you may maybe even make it a little narrower too.
Yeah,
can you find
absolutely.
the right balance between, it's such a lovely room, particularly when it's full of light. You want to maintain that, but you've got to find that
That
balance
sweet
of
spot.
trying to try to increase, in building efficiency, that you'd be talking about the average R value of the wall assembly, right?
Okay.
So what is the sweet spot that you could do there?
Yes, but now back to my question, and I
Yeah.
think your suggestions are excellent and spot on,
Yeah.
and also maybe kind of even thinking along the low-hanging fruit category.
Yeah.
So would we be talking about that? Would we be thinking about that prior to having a building envelope assessment done, or would we wait for a contractor to come in and to be talking to us about that?
I think if you have a building envelope assessment done, I would ask them to include in their evaluation that those kinds of options.
Okay, very
Yeah.
good.
Rather
That's
than
great.
just, but let them know you're open to that. So instead of them just saying, oh, you'd replace these single pane windows with double pane windows, say, tell us how to optimize the average R value of this wall, right?
Okay, that's
Yeah.
an excellent suggestion.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a prime example, but that could be applied across the board, across the campus. And I'm sure with other churches too. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Great recommendation.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So I hope you're getting away for a much
Yeah, we've
R&R.
we've got our annual, we do a week out in Lenox and do all of Tanglewood and all that fun stuff.
That's such an awesome place.
Yeah, so that's
Oh.
coming up the week of July 15th through like the 23rd, 24th.
Awesome.
And I
Awesome.
think this must be our 27th or 28th year with one of my best friends from college and his family.
Oh, what
So
fun.
that's always a highlight of the year.
Oh,
Yeah.
what a wonderful I mean, it's a
Yeah,
tradition.
it is.
Oh, that's
And
fabulous, Jeff.
and their kids are now like, grown out of college and stuff.
Oh.
And we started before they were born. So, we've grown up with them out in Lenox. It's been
Oh,
fabulous.
fabulous.
Yeah.
Fabulous.
Yeah. So
Well,
definitely looking forward to that.
absolutely. Well, have a wonderful time. We have plans. We're having
Mhm.
our son, daughter-in-law, and our grandchild come.
Oh,
And we
nice.
just learned that we have another grandchild on the way, so
How exciting.
we're very excited.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yes, but then after they leave, they live in Dubai. Um,
Holy cow.
and yeah, that's why they come here, because it's cooler. But in late August, September timeframe, early September, we're going to Glacier National Park
Oh,
to do some, yeah, I've never been, but I heard it's
it's-
outstanding.
yeah, it's supposed to be gorgeous. Definitely on my bucket list.
Yes, yes, it's on ours too. So we're going to see if we can
Yeah.
check that off.
Yeah.
So, well,
Yeah.
then,
Well, you can't get into Yellowstone, so Glacier's
I
just
know.
half of Montana away from there. So what the heck, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad I made reservations long in advance, because I'm sure people were hopping over from Yellowstone and trying to flood into Montana. So
Yeah.
no, we're in, thankfully.
That's
So
great. Oh, that sounds like a great trip.
we're looking forward to it. So Jim, I will be in touch very shortly, and a
Wonderful.
great meeting. Great meeting. And thank you so much for recording it. I had intended on getting some notes to you. That did not happen, so I'm really glad you're recording. I have some notes here, but